Okay, so welcome to the Design of Play series. This is episode number 6, where we will be talking about Portal. In this series, we talk about, I play through a different game, and then I spend a week researching the game, finding out information about the development history of the game, how the IP came to be, the things that can be seen as influential either in the positive or negative aspects, and we talk about lots of different things, mostly what the industry we can learn from the release of the game itself. So this week we're doing Portal 1. Before we actually get into the discussion, I do want to mention a couple things first. First, if you watch the ukulele discussion video, or you were here to participate in the ukulele discussion, you'll see at the end of the video that I talked about how the next discussion was going to be Portal 1 and Portal 2, and that was the original plan. However, we are going to be breaking these discussions into 2 different discussions. It's not going to be Portal 1 and Portal 2 in one full discussion. They're each going to have their own. The reason was, despite the fact that Portal 1 is a pretty short game, usually taking about 4 hours for most people to complete on a first playthrough, there was a lot of information out there, a lot of very interesting information about the history and the development of the game, and just as much information about the development of Portal 2, really. So I could have squished them together for one full discussion, but it probably would have taken about 5 hours, roughly, maybe, and that would have absolutely killed my voice to just be talking nonstop for 5 hours. And I kind of didn't want to do that. It also would have killed my voice to be talking that long. So the other reason was that I don't really know how to format it specifically to be talking about 2 different games in one discussion as we go section by section, topic by topic. It'd be kind of weird to be talking about it and then jumping to another one, especially since there are 2 games in the series. I feel like if there were 2 similar games, like for example, if I were to have a discussion where I talk about Call of Duty and Battlefield, they are very similar, can clearly be compared, but it'd be a little bit easier to notice the differences between the 2 of them. I feel like it'd be pretty confusing to have a discussion about Portal 1 and Portal 2 since they share so much in common with each other. So I've decided to push the discussion, split it in half. We're having Portal 1 today, and we'll have Portal 2. The discussion for Portal 2 will take place on Monday. The other thing I want to announce before we get this started is I'm sorry it has taken me so long to get the ukulele video up on YouTube. I've had very, very eventful week. It's been a little rough, but the video is uploaded. It's been, trimmed down to fit better. It is uploaded on YouTube. I just need to make the thumbnail, and I just need to go through I need to scrub through the video to find the timestamps to put that in the description, and lastly, cite the sources in the description. I have all the sources. I just, it's a bit of a process to go and copy and paste them all. Just the way I format them in my, when I'm taking notes and everything like that. So, yeah. Portal 1 and Portal 2 are now split into 2 discussions. We're doing Portal 1 today. Portal 2 will be on Wednesday. Ukulele video will be up on YouTube. I'm hoping by this time tomorrow. There's not a whole lot to be done, but it's just, I've had a lot to do. So I think with that out of the way, we'll just get on to the discussion. For Portal 1, this was a game that was released October 10th in 2007. It was a game that was developed by Valve, a very, very popular, very well-known developer. Believe it or not, they were a developer at some point in the video game industry. They are most known for making the Half-Life series, Counter-Strike series, Left 4 Dead series, the Dota game, Team Fortress series, and probably the one they are most well-known for, their most beloved series, Artifact. They are... while Portal was made by Valve, technically, Portal itself was actually made by a rookie team that Valve picked up after they saw a prototype that really drew their interest in. They had a rookie team who went and made a prototype. They went and made Portal from that prototype. Excuse me. When Portal was eventually created and sold, they didn't actually sell the game individually. They didn't sell the game by itself. They didn't have to try to sell people on Portal, because the way that they sold the game was they actually sold it as a package deal in a box set called the Orange Box. The Orange Box had a value pack essentially that contained the Half-Life 2 series as well as 2 other new products. So they had the first Half-Life series game, they had Half-Life 2, They're the first expansion for Half-Life 2. All these had been released already at some point. These were being sold as a package deal. And then for the new expansions, they had Half-Life 2 Episode 2, which the second expansion, which was brand new. And then they also had Team Fortress 2. Now, the Half-Life series is basically one of gaming's most beloved IPs. Every release from the series at one purchase at a time was an absolute steal. It was pretty much a must-buy. The fact that it also came with the expansion on top of it was just, it was fantastic. And then you had Team Fortress 2, which was a game that people had been dying for a very long time. So, more or less, at the time being, the orange box was kind of seen as probably the best deal in gaming, for the best bang for your buck. And so selling the orange box was a pretty easy sell for a lot of different people. And since Valve knew that people were going to be purchasing the orange box, they kind of just snuck in Portal in there. They were basically selling a bundle pack by drawing people in on new IPs or existing IPs that had a lot of attention. They had a lot of people had strong connections, and they really wanted the games. And they, at the same time, were able to get Portal out into people's hands for them to experience a brand new game for themselves. So not only did people get a brand new game that they could have potentially loved, Valve was able to, they didn't have to advertise or push or sell or try to get people to buy Portal. It just got it directly into their hands. So it was a perfect win-win situation for everyone involved. Yeah, people still play Team Fortress 2 to this day. This came out, again, October 10th, 2007. This is being recorded October 1st, 2020. Team Fortress 2 still has a very active player base. People were extremely hyped for Team Fortress 2 at the original time when it was coming out. It is, and then of course, again, still there. Haven't heard the Half-Life 3 meme in a little while, possibly because we got Half-Life Alyx. But I mean, Half-Life Alyx came out not too long ago. I think it was this year. Yeah, it was this year, and it's still regarded as one of the best video game IPs of all time. So Orange Box was a fantastic deal. It was an insane deal to pass up on. So the fact that it came with Portal was an extra added benefit, because it was a free game essentially that came with when you were purchasing the Orange Box, and it got into people's hands. It was actually very smart. Okay. So talking about the history of the IP leading up to the release of it, not as much to talk about, because this is the first entry in the series. But we can talk about this. And boy, howdy, is there a decent amount to talk about with this. So, Portal and how it took shape. Portal originally started as an earlier game called Narbacular Drop. Now, I want to say first, Narbacular Drop is a freeware game that anyone can go out and download right now. If you go into Google, you type in Narbacular Drop download, it will take you to a link. You can download the game yourself for free and try it out yourself. And I really do suggest that everyone does it. It's a very short game, probably 10-15 minutes. And it's a great game. I still enjoyed it, despite the fact it was such a short, basic kind of, more than anything else, a tech demo. And it's an awesome game. I will warn you, since it is a tech demo, it is a little bit buggy. If you're playing and you have any issues where there's a puzzle that just can't seem to be solved for any reason, usually if you kill your character, jump in a death pit or whatever, get killed by an enemy, and reset the room, whatever it was will usually fix itself, correct itself, you can solve the puzzles. But it was a very short game, with the main character being called Princess No Knees, due to the fact that she could not jump. And it was a game very, very similar to what Portal was. And that was basically placing portals in the world around you as a means to solve puzzles to progress further into the game. This game was made by a group of college kids at a college called the DigiPen Institute of Technology. The group of kids called their development group Nuclear Monkey Software. And the game was actually made by the group as their senior year project at the school. Every single year while attending the school, you had to create a game to submit to, showcase all the things that you had learned and prove that you had an actual grasp for what you learned at the school. This was the team's senior year submission. And after they submitted it for the senior year game, they also went to, it was submitted for DigiPen's annual career fair. This is a career fair that's held every single year. They usually attract some people in the industry to come take a look at potential new talent, new people who are working in the industry, and scout people out. At this event, they had someone named Robin Walker who attended the event. Robin Walker is one of Valve's developers. When he attended the event, he came across Narbacular Drop. He played it, tried it out, and the team asked him for some feedback, some advice, and he kind of teared the board a game. He tore the game apart. And at the end of it, he decided to leave his card for them. Said that if they had any further questions, that they could send him a message. And so after the fair ended, the team eventually did contact him. They shot him an email, asked him for any more feedback he could offer. And instead of giving feedback, he actually responded back and said instead, why don't you come to Valve and give a presentation of your game in person if you want? And of course, the team was very excited. They leapt at the opportunity, went to Valve headquarters, and they expected it to be a small presentation for a very small group of people. And apparently, many people continued to shuffle in for a long time until what it seemed like almost the entire staff was there. And then finally, Gabe Newell also showed up. So the team was extremely nervous about this. We're doing their presentation, playing through the game, and apparently partway through the presentation, Gabe actually had them stop and offered them jobs on the spot to work at Valve and turn the game Narbacular Drop into a full-fledged release at Valve. Yep. They were brought in, did a presentation, and in the middle of the presentation, he apparently stopped them and offered them all jobs on the spot. Who is Gabe? Gabe Newell is the head of Valve. He is the person who runs the company. He is the face of Valve. He is the face of Steam. Very big member in the gaming community. Very beloved by many different people. So the reason why he offered them a job was because he said the main thing that stood out to them was they took the concept and really ran with it. That they had a product that had, they came to them with a product that showed quite a bit of polish in the mechanics in the game, with things like the interaction, like the actual mechanic of the portal itself, but then building on top of it, the players' interactions with the portal, as well as the enemies and other parts of the environment interaction with the portal. It's not just a basic concept of idea, but actually fleshing it out and really running with the idea. This was something that's actually surprisingly uncommon in the industry. For early game developers, a lot of people, when they start making their first game, they kind of have a list of different concepts and ideas that they really like and think would be great in a video game, and kind of force it into this amalgamation that doesn't exactly mesh or blend together very well. That there isn't a base foundation for the game, because all of these 15 different parts are the base foundation. And that's the problem. The key design, the most important part of a good game, is having a core primary gameplay loop, which is, as we discussed earlier, this is the thing that 90% of your gameplay is going to be based around, or usually anything you add to the game is something that adds to or layers on top of or entices this mechanic. So they had their base, their primary loop was using portals to move through the levels, and they built the entire game and the levels and the puzzles they had around this idea, and polished on it and expanded even further. So this really stood out to him because, again, this is something that a lot of developers takes quite a while for them to learn this, and these were just students in school who had already got this figured out. Gabe also said that he offered the entire team jobs at one time because he did not want to break up the team. He had seen the product that they had created, and he saw and he knew that in order to have a product of that quality, the team clearly had fantastic chemistry, the type of chemistry that could take up to 10 years to make themselves. So he didn't want to, break up the band kind of thing. He knew that once school was over, they would probably go their separate ways, getting jobs at different companies in different locations, and never have the opportunity to create a product together. So he wanted to have an opportunity to get this group of talent that clearly had something fantastic. He wanted to keep them together and give them the chance to create and ship a product. So the team was obviously brought on to Valve, and they developed an Arbacular drop into a full product, which would eventually become Portal. Never knew who he was. Yeah, no, he's just the head of Valve. The team then started working on the project, and the team had very limited resources, very restrictive resources. They had a very tight budget. The game Portal never had more than 10 people working on it. And funny enough, in hindsight, the team has said that they believe these restrictions were the reason the game was able to be as perfect as it was. Had they had a bigger budget, had they had more manpower, had they had less strict time limits or time restraints, they would have added a lot more to the game. Things like the Ratman in Portal would have actually been a full character instead of just a tool that was used to deliver story in a very unique way, and also as a tool to foreshadow future events in the game. GLaDOS would not have been an antagonist egging on the player in the game, but instead have been a robot companion who was going to follow the players through the test. Because and these potential outcomes did not come to fruition because of the restrictions that they had on the time, the money, and the manpower. A lot of the factors that people loved so much about Portal could have been changed in the final product if those restrictions weren't in place. To summarize this, Eric Wolpaw, one of the writers for Portal, was quoted as saying, "Embrace constraints to fuel creativity." I don't know if I've talked about it in this series before, but it's absolutely true. There is an example in Crazy Taxi is the big one. There's the arrow that's above the player, above the car, that points in the direction the player has to go, and that was actually that mechanic was trademarked. Games could not use that for 15, 20 years or however long patents last for. And because of that, developers were required to think of different means to guide the player where they had to go. So, you think of The Witcher, where they had that glowy trail that you go down. You have the ever popular and ever present minimap. You have the little circular compass at the top of the screen, like how they have in Skyrim. Lots of different games have all these different mechanisms to guide the player. And if it weren't for, these restraints, it wouldn't have forced his creativity, and for all we know, it could have been the arrow, could have been the standard for the next 5, 6, 7 years, because no one wanted to reinvent the wheel, no one wanted to deviate, and eventually someone would have deviated from it, but it would have set us back quite a few years. This is not an encouragement for patent trolls. Obviously, there is good and bad to the situation. Too many restraints can be a problem, but restraints can fuel creativity when you really want to have something in, but you need to think of a clever way to implement it. Yeah, the main meme with Valve is they don't know how to count to 3. All right. Yeah, we'll do that. Okay. Okay. So, before we go on to the final product that we had in Portal, we are going to talk about the games that came around Portal's release. 2 things about this. Well, actually, first I should say, in case this is anyone's first time, this is the first video that anyone sees in the series. The reason why I go and talk about the games released around whatever game we're talking about at hand is because I think it's really important to take into account what was significant at the time, what games were popular, what genre was popular, what was really dominating the market, because it can kind of give an idea of what the market was looking for, what gamers and consumers were looking for, what type of game, what type of experience, what was popular, what was not, what was unique, what was a clone, everything like that. And I mean, when we talked about the whole Metroid Prime discussion, it really goes to show just how outlandish of an idea it was when you look at what games were coming out at the time. So, and it's also just interesting to kind of go back in history. I think everyone always says that, you know, this year sucked, this year sucked, this year sucked. But when you look at the actual releases in that year, you realize there were some fantastic releases. 2007 was the big one. We talked about this in the BioShock discussion. But there was a lot of different games coming out this year. And I also don't really know what to do and how to compare this, because what I like to do is break it down as releases that would be seen as a competitor to the game we're talking and games that were not a game that's a competitor to the game at hand. And I think it's important to list both of them, because most consumers, most gamers only have a set amount of money that they can spend each year. You know, if I only have enough money to, you know, if I have $100, I can only really buy 2 games a year. That's a major factor on whether I'm going to buy a game, because if I can only buy 2 games a year, it's very important which of those 2 games I'm going to buy and how excited I am and what I want to what I put as priority over it. So hype can definitely play into those factors. And so even though I'm someone who loves Nintendo games, I still like to play my occasional shooters. And if I only have a set amount of money, looking at the list of major releases, it can show how difficult it can be to sell these games when you're going up against the releases that come out at the time. But this is also a bit odd because, like I said before, Portal wasn't advertised. Portal wasn't the selling point. Portal was a package deal. Portal was kind of like a surprise more than anything that was snuck into that was snuck into the orange box as an extra little bonus for purchasing the package. So I don't really know whether to list games as competitors because they're competitors to Team Fortress and Half-Life, which are shooters, or do we list games that are competitors because they are puzzle solver games? I feel like there really is no right or wrong to this. I'm just going to compare it as puzzle games. And 2007 was not really a big year for puzzle games. There was literally only one competitor that I could find of that was really much of a competitor at all in terms of puzzle games. That was Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass, which was a game leading up to the release of Portal. Other than that, it was still a very big year. We had a lot of different games that came out in 2007. We had, as Levy said, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. We had Halo 3. We had Call of Duty Modern Warfare. We had Crysis. We had Super Mario Galaxy. We had Skate. We had Guitar Hero 3. We had Rock Band. We had Manhunt 2. We had Assassin's Creed. We had Witcher. There was a lot of really big major games that came out this year. Really highly competitive game market to try to push your game out and get other people to purchase. But the only game that I could see that could be seen as a puzzle game or kind of draw maybe similar types of players would be Phantom Hourglass, The Legend of Zelda. I thought about maybe listing Super Paper Mario, but I don't know. Very, very light year for puzzle games, at least as far as the major market was concerned. Half-Life 2, Team Fortress 2 were the only ones you had to target. Yeah, I still think the Half-Life series as a whole being incorporated into the package was a big deal as well. It can be difficult when you know that there's a game that's a series that has 2 or 3 games in the series, and you hear people talk about how great it is, how fantastic it is, and you want to experience it yourself, but you don't want to go buy the previous 2 games either because it can be expensive. They could be hard to get their hands on. Maybe they're on a different platform. It's the orange box being released for Xbox 360 and I believe PlayStation 3 as well. And having everything to lead up to the new release at the same time was absolutely, I think, a huge factor and a very big deal. But obviously, one of the big factors was that it offered the new expansion for Half-Life because people were going absolutely gaga for it. Hi, Trouble. Also, thank you, Laddie. Hope you're doing well. Oh, competition for the purchase. Yeah. I mean, if we talk about games that are considered competition to the orange box itself, there was a lot of competition to be had. Call of Duty 4, Halo 3, Metroid Prime 3. as direct shooters in terms of actiony type of similar types of feel and action types of games, then you still also Crysis, but you also have things like Manhunt 2, Witcher, Assassin's Creed, God of War. It's also fairly similar types of experiences in those games. So it was a very big year for gaming. Also, probably should have mentioned this before, but the when we talk about the games around the release of a game, it's not strictly and specifically the year that the game is located in. Portal came out in October of 2007. It would be kind of unfair to compare the releases in February of 2007 and completely negate and ignore all the releases that would come out in January 2008. So I usually take the 6 months before and the 6 months after the release of a game. So in this case, since Portal came out in October, I basically took from April of 2007 all the way to April of 2008. Okay. All right. So we kind of briefly touched on the subject of the games coming around the release of Portal. A little bit more difficult to discuss since it was a puzzle game being packaged in a game full of shooters. But we're now going to talk about Portal itself, the development of Portal, the final product that we got, because there's a lot to talk about with this game. Developers are very proud of this game, clearly, and I think Valve knew that they had something special on their hands. And the devs have been very open since then. And they've had lots of different interviews and discussions over the years where they talk about the game and the development history of it. So first thing we'll talk about with the final product of Portal is why Portal itself was groundbreaking. What about it was groundbreaking? And that was the physics. Valve has always been known to really enjoy their games with physics. Usually in the Half-Life series, whenever they have some kind of advancement in their engine that works with physics in a different way, that tends to be a huge primary focus, at least at some point in the game. So the fact that Valve took on Portal with its unique physics system makes complete sense. The big thing with Portal is it has the conservation and redirection of momentum through portals. So when you go through a portal, you're not just simply plopping out of the other portal. You are preserving whatever direction and momentum that you have going into the portal and coming out of the other one. And it's not just the player itself, it's any objects that go through the portal. So you drop a cube into the portal. If it picks up any speed on in the process of landing inside the portal, it will maintain that when coming out the other one and carry it further, as well as the direction it's going to. Oh, I do love the song, but I feel like this is probably going to get me DMCA'd. So as much as I'd like to listen to it, I don't think we can. Also, the Portal soundtrack's a little bit shorter than I thought, so let's do the Portal 2 soundtrack. Yeah, this might work a little better. Yeah, as GLaDOS simply described it in-game, speedy thing goes in, speedy thing goes out with the portals. But this was a very big deal back then. Big draw point, and it's why they were able to create the puzzles that they were able to create. So going on from what about it was groundbreaking, we'll start talking. We'll just give a very brief overview of the characters in the game, and I say very brief because there really is only 3 characters to really talk about. That would be Chell. She was just the silent protagonist. She was the vessel for the player to experience the game in. We have GLaDOS, who is the antagonist, who ends up becoming the final villain, the person who starts off as just a disembodied voice at the beginning of the game, slowly getting more and more aggressive, angry, twisted as the game progresses further, until eventually you come face to face with them and you turn them into more of a monster themselves. And then the last character I put in air quotes we have is the Rat Man. And this is a man who leaves scribbles on the walls in hidden areas to help with the world building, to help set the tone a little bit more, and to help foreshadow later events that will occur in the game. But as in the entire game, those are the only 3 characters that you really have any kind of interaction with. Or as far as you're aware, they're the only 3 characters that exist at all. So now we can start getting into some of the juicier parts. Let's start talking about the story of Portal 1. A year into development for Portal 1, the team had developed 14 levels that were regularly being tested by playtesters. And playtesters loved it, but a very, very common response from playtesters was, this is really fun, so when's the game start? People enjoyed solving the puzzles, but they thought the rooms were a type of training. They were expecting the rooms to be building up to something bigger, and they really wanted to know what that was. They wanted to have some kind of info as to what exactly the training was building up to. The big problem with that was there really wasn't anything. Portal was kind of just mostly seen as a puzzle testing, a puzzle solver, without anything it was really leading up to. And the devs realized that without a real fail state or a real goal to strive for, there was a huge lack of drive to push the player forward and go on to the next area besides just solving puzzles. This eventually led the devs to creating a narrative, and the first thing that they created this was the character GLaDOS. At one point, they did have a plan to introduce another character in the game. This was going to be another test subject like Chell, and they were supposed to meet at some point, but due to time constraints, they had to cut the character. But instead of completely dropping them and removing all existence of them, they decided to sprinkle tidbits of the character's existence throughout the game in these little hidden alcoves off the beaten path, and this was the character that eventually became the Ratman. This decision allowed the opportunity to include more storytelling elements, but in a way that was much more lean than the typical type of storytelling that you see in most games where characters have huge monologues or have they would play cutscenes for a while and deliver the story. This was something that the player could find and experience for themselves, and add the details to the world that made it feel more natural, especially since it was a very creepy way to do it. It felt like it was much more significant when it was delivered in this format. It's actually my problem with most endless puzzle games with tons of levels. The feeling of progression is super important for me in games, so even if I love the gameplay, if it's not leading to anything, my interest is super quick. Yep, absolutely. It's one of those things where the human mind is very interesting. The human mind always looks for patterns. It always looks for a reasoning. And in real life, that doesn't always happen. It's very common for things to just happen because they just happen. And if there's any movies or TV shows or books or video games where that is the reasoning for it, most people get upset. They get frustrated because they think that's lazy. And it could be argued as lazy, but when it comes to entertainment medium, people want some kind of drive. They want some kind of reason for things to be happening. There always has to be an explanation for it, and the explanation has to be significant in some way, when the reality is, in the real life, that's not always the case. But yep, in video games, it can be difficult for giving that drive for something just as simple as solving puzzles. And Portal 1 originally had that problem, but they addressed that issue. I think they did a good job with it. Honestly, where games have lore and story that is optional usually makes it so much more deep and real feeling. Absolutely. I mean, that's part of the reason why I think BioShock is beloved as it is for the story, besides the fact that the story is spread out through the world, which makes the world feel more organic. It encourages exploration. It encourages players to look in every nook and cranny because they get a little bit of information, they get a crumb of more details that, paints a bigger picture, and people want more of that, so they continue looking for that type of thing. But it just, again, makes it feel more real. It makes it feel like it's much more natural and organic, as opposed to when you're sitting there for cutscenes, you're very aware of the fact you're kind of just sitting there watching a video. When you stumble upon something, it's a much more organic feeling, and it feels like rewarding. It feels like you found the secret, and you feel so much more clever that you were able to find this hidden area or this hidden location that could be overlooked, but you were smart enough to find it yourself. So, the story in Portal was very basic. It was very simple. It was there, but it was also something that was late, so there isn't as much to talk about with the story, but there is a lot to talk about with the levels. So the first thing before we talk about the levels specifically, let's talk about some of the mechanics. that in Portal. So most of the feature mechanics that were in Narbacular Drop were brought over into Portal. So this includes the portals, the unique ability for objects to preserve their kinetic energy while they travel through the portals, puzzles as being the main progression gate through the game. Portal had death pits, it had enemies to avoid and work around, there were pressure buttons, there were boxes, as well as a lack of fall damage. There were some things that were tweaked from Narbacular Drop. In Narbacular Drop, you could actually place a portal through another portal. It was a really wild concept. So you would, place a portal on a wall across the way, and then you place another portal right in front of you. And you're looking through the portal in front of you, and you can see where you're obviously going to come out. You could actually replace the portal's location through the first one, and it could have some very interesting implementations. They removed this in Portal for simplicity's sake, probably for the best. I think it would have been cool to think about how that could be implemented into level design, but I feel like that would have been incredibly difficult to design for, and it could have made for some incredibly difficult puzzles to solve. The original game is called Narbacular Drop. I'll type it in chat. Narbacular Drop, and the reason why it's called Narbacular Drop was strictly to make it easier to search for. It would help with the search results. Apparently Narbacular is a word that has no meaning, does not exist in any language. They just wanted to create a word that would be very easy to Google, something that stands out, and when you Google it, nothing else would come up except for their game. Kind of clever. On top of not being able to place portals to other portals in Portal, the other thing was your character could now jump. Narbacular Drop's main character was Princess No Knees. She was unable to jump. You could jump in Portal, although just barely. You might as well have not been able to do, because my god, she's got no ups. But those were the minor changes for the mechanics in the game. Now that we've established the mechanics, we could talk about the chambers. And in the game, there were 19 chambers of puzzles that you had to solve a puzzle in each room in order to move on to the next one. And what the puzzles actually were tutorials. And this was all of the puzzles. All 19 of the puzzles was basically tutorials before you go to the final gauntlet of the game and do the last section, the most difficult part that the game has to offer. That means that roughly 80% of the game is tutorial. That's insane. That's amazing. That is so difficult to pull off. They managed to make the tutorial process of the game be the vast majority of the content in the game, but they made it so engaging, people still enjoyed the hell out of it, because the trick was making the player thinking the tutorial is the game. This is something that was very common in much older days, much older hardware. Back then, they had limitations on memory and space, so they couldn't really allocate a large chunk of gameplay to being strictly tutorial that taught the player how to play the game. That was valuable space that could be made into actual levels or more gameplay. The other thing was, besides the memory restrictions, there was also just hardware restrictions. It was kind of difficult in some games to give a flat-out tutorial that taught the player in an effective manner. So the way that a lot of older games did their tutorials was by building the tutorials into the earlier levels in a natural and organic way that the players didn't even realize they were being tutorialized. And this is something I think games could really use a revitalization of, that more games should do it, because look at Portal did it. Portal is 80% tutorial, and people still love the hell out of it. And most people don't even realize that 80% of the game is tutorial. It's incredible, and goes to show it's not an outdated mechanic. It's not something that can't be done in modern times. They did an absolutely fantastic job, and I really think that does not get enough attention that they managed to pull that off. Easy to spell phonetically. It's nice. It is. All right, so after all the 19 chambers are completed, and then you go into the gauntlet, and you complete the gauntlet, then comes the final boss fight. The player eventually confronts GLaDOS, who had slowly been built up as an antagonist by antagonizing the player. And you finally get to face her after she tries to kill you at the end of the 19th chamber. When the final chamber is over, instead of just going to your normal elevator that takes you to the next mission, it's a lift that takes you into a fiery pit that takes you to your death and kills you, but you escape with the use of the portal gun. So you get to GLaDOS, you do the boss fight, but the devs were really having a lot of trouble figuring out how to make a boss fight for a puzzle game. They didn't want to throw out new mechanics just for the final boss fight that could easily be seen as a cop-out. It could also be really frustrating to have the stresses of trying to fight a final boss, and then all of a sudden there's a new mechanic thrown your way, and now you have to try and figure out how to use that new mechanic, how that mechanic works, and how to use it as a weapon against the player. And as we discussed in the Banjo-Kazooie video, a good boss fight design is it's a challenge that challenges the player on everything they've learned up until that point. It's about taking everything that you've learned in the entire game up until that point, and then this is the final test to show that you truly understand what the game has taught you, that you very much are a master at what has been presented before you. Putting in a new mechanic as something to overcome the boss definitely feels a little bit cheesy and doesn't quite sit right. So is the final boss of DK64 the ultimate final boss? I still think that Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts is one of the best final boss segments, where we talked about how there's the final boss where you fight Grunty, which is based around the combat aspects of your vehicle, where you have to fight her on land, in the water, while she's invisible, while she's much more bulky, where you have to have sheer firepower, where she flies in the air, and she's very nimble. It's creating a vehicle that can tackle all of the different ways that a vehicle can be created in an offensive manner. And you have to do it as a gauntlet, one after the other. And then there's a secondary optional boss fight, which is all about the functionality of your vehicle, about being able to carry things, about being able to move things, about being able to destroy things. I can't remember all the different aspects of the functionality part. I think there's maneuverability, there's flight, there's being able to float on the water, tight controls, all of these different things. So they have there's so many different mechanics in Nuts and Bolts, and they break it down into two major categories of functionality and combat, and the boss fight is true test of the both of them. I think that Banjo Nuts and Bolts is actually one of the best examples that I can think of in recent memory that does one of the best boss fights in video game history, in my opinion. Hi, Rim. But going back to Portal and to GLaDOS, they didn't want to add a new mechanic at the end because they wanted to make sure it was a test of what players had learned up until that point. They didn't want to make a crazy overcomplicated puzzle that would just frustrate the players. You're so close to the end, you're so close to finishing. They didn't want players to be completely walled off by one difficult puzzle that they couldn't get at the end. And they also didn't want to make the final boss fight really over flashy or over actiony to kind of deter and deviate from the puzzle direction the game had been building up until that point. So they, while trying to come up with an answer to this problem, they looked back in other parts of the game and they realized that players really loved the sequence when GLaDOS tries to kill the player. Specifically the very beginning of that sequence when you narrowly escape. So as I said, there's the lift that carries you into the fire and you escape from going into the fire. This is arguably the easiest puzzle you encounter in the game thus far. It's literally, as you see the fire in front of you and you're about to go into the fire, you see there's a ledge behind you with a wall. You shoot the portal at it, you turn to your side, either side, shoot the portal at the wall next to you, and you just jump out. Easiest thing in the world. It's literally two portals that take 1 second to pull off. Incredibly easy, especially since it was so far into the game, 80% through the game. But people absolutely loved this. Because the time limit made it feel climactic and satisfying to solve. This is when the devs realized that if they made a boss with a very simple puzzle to solve, but they added a timer counting down, it would make things much more tense and it would make the final boss fight a lot more memorable. So they ended up doing a time boss fight where the timer is basically the neurotoxin gas, and so you are racing against the clock to try to figure out a very relatively simple puzzle on how to beat her. On top of this, the added bonus was that when they decided to go this direction with the boss fight, one, they could set a hard limit on dialogue. I mean, the game clearly has a huge focus on dialogue in the writing. By setting a time limit, they have a hard limit on how much that they needed to write for this segment. And they also said that the neurotoxin gas was extremely simple to code. Again, as we talked about, very small team of only, never more than 10 people, very limited manpower and money and resources. So something as simple as just adding the neurotoxin gas was apparently incredibly easy to make for them. So they're very happy with it. The time limit is also not actually tight, which I feel is ironically very important for time limits. Tension is frustration. Yes, it's very difficult to balance those two. I remember, I want to say when I first played Portal, I want to say I beat it with about a minute and a half, 90 seconds on the clock, and the fight is 6 minutes. So it took me 4.5 minutes. About 70% of the time, which I think is a fair estimate. Also, when you're, again, it's about the fact that there is a time limit. So it makes time seem like it's going so much faster, and you're just, quote unquote panic thinking. It definitely adds to the sense of tension when going into the boss fight. I felt like I had far less time when the timer was over. It's one of those things where if the player finishes the fight and they think like, oh my god, I probably had like 15 seconds left, and they have like a minute and a half, 2 minutes, I think that's a fantastic sign that it really added to the tension, but clearly gave them a lot of time with what to do. Exactly. Because they're not, if there's I think they also did it great because they made it clear that there is a timer, there is a time limit, and they put a timer in the room, but you have to look for it. So I feel like a lot of games nowadays put the timer in the corner of the screen or on the top of the screen, and I get it. It's nice to have that easy access to see how much time you have left. I feel like a lot of different timer segments seem to be, I think of like Metroid, where it's the escape sequence where you need to double back, so there's not necessarily going to be an easy accessible area for you to have time to look at. But any option, I think, where the timer is not constantly visible for the player at all times, I think is way better because it adds that sense of tension, but it still gives them the opportunity to, if they really want to know how much time they have left, they can seek it out and look for it. But if they don't actively know how quickly time is passing in their head, because obviously when your tension is high and you get nervous and you're racing against the clock, it can make it seem like time's going a lot quicker than it is. I think it's a really great mechanic to make it so that the player has to look it out, because it definitely adds some more tension when they can't see time passing, but they have to try to perceive time passing while trying to solve the problem as well. So, talked about the final boss. I want to take a step back a little bit and talk about a specific chamber, and that would be arguably one of the most well-known chambers, and that would be the companion cube chamber. So, in this chamber, this chamber is the one that spawns the very popular, very well-known companion cube beam, and it's the chamber that everyone seems to remember, and the reason why they remember is because of a very, very minor tweak. During the testing process with this chamber, the devs were running into a problem. One of the devs said that they were having trouble getting players to, quote, drag the stupid thing around. The idea behind this chamber was that you would have to take a cube that you encounter, a cube just like any other cube you encountered in any other previous chambers. You had to take this cube and you had to carry it with you through the entire room, the entire chamber, the entire puzzle. It was required to be brought with you at all times from beginning to the end in order to complete this chamber. But the problem was, in early player testing, players would forget about this cube constantly. They would leave it behind, and then they would get frustrated because they could not figure out how to do the next puzzle in the other part of the chamber, because they obviously needed the cube, but they had forgotten about it because they left it behind. Players were getting very frustrated, and it was a struggle for the developers to figure out a way how to get the players to bring the cube with them without flat out telling them the answer or explaining it to them. One of the writers had overheard that about this issue, and the writer had an idea. apparently they had recently read some government interrogation documents that had become declassified, and in the papers it showed that isolation led to subjects becoming more attached to inanimate objects. This gave the writer the new idea of presenting the companion cube as your only friend in the world. They did some slight changes with the aesthetic by putting little hearts on the side, but all it took was a change in dialogue, presenting the companion cube different, putting hearts, one heart on 6 sides of a cube, and after that, no one ever forgot about the companion cube again. No one ever left it behind, and it is now one of the memorable chambers that people talk about and still remember months and years after they played. And I think there's a really, really, really important lesson to learn from this, is a lot of people think of game design as designing the levels, designing mechanics, designing the player, designing their interaction, the different interaction of characters. But I think this is a really important lesson, that dialogue and writing can be just as useful a tool in game design as any other tool. The way that the player, that information is communicated to the player, either by nonverbal communication through experiencing and trial and error, can be great, but also dialogue by the world, by characters, is also a huge tool that could be done in tons of different ways that have very strong results, as proved by the companion cube chamber. So Castaway is accurate? Yeah, no, Castaway is definitely accurate. I feel like a thing that even the biggest games coming out to Mass Critical game are forgiven to be memorable. So I will, I'm trying to remember, do I talk about this in this game or do I talk about it in Portal 2? But yeah, we kind of talk about that later. But yeah, no, I lightly touch on that subject, Mally. Basically, games nowadays, modern AAA games, just try to cast as wide a net as possible. They're not trying to make something necessarily memorable. They're trying to get, I believe, as many people playing it, so it becomes a word of mouth thing. And that's where they try to get everything from the experience of the game. Not from people who, not from the memories that people create while playing the games and that they can experience and talk about at a later point, but instead by by just getting as many people potentially interested at some point and getting them to play, and kind of word of mouth because everyone's playing at the same time. So we just talked about the companion cube chamber and the slight change in the dialogue, but there is something more to bring up with the companion cube chamber. This level was an absolute goldmine. There's actually a direct connection between the companion cube chamber and the final boss fight. So while the devs were making the final boss fight, they added the incinerator to the fight, where you had to, basically get the cores off of GLaDOS, then take the cores and drop them into incinerator. And that's how you defeat GLaDOS. One of the developers pointed out that they had not introduced this mechanic at all in the game, though. We talked about it just a little while ago, about how introducing a last-second mechanic can be seen as really cheesy, can be seen as a cop-out, and not exactly indicative of a great final boss, a final test, when it's something that's being introduced to you at that time. They realized that this was actually, they tried to figure out what they could do about this, and they realized that they needed to reintroduce the mechanic at some other point in the game so that players could be familiar with it. Not to mention, but besides the cop-out mechanic, it could also just be something that players could really easily overlook. And also on the topic that we talked about before, where it can be frustrating for players to have to spend time testing and researching and understanding a brand new mechanic for a boss fight that's already in a tense situation. So they decided to try and reintroduce the incinerator mechanic at another part of the game. And that point, they realized they could include it in the companion cube chamber and have a much stronger conclusion to that chamber than how they had before. So in the original version of the companion cube chamber, you would simply just leave the companion cube behind, go into your elevator, and go on to your next mission. But now they decided that they would include the incinerator and have the player forced to murder the companion cube. This would give a lot of weight to the player's action by, coming full circle where it's introduced as your only friend. The players then, it makes it so much more difficult to kill the cube afterwards instead of just leaving it behind. But at the same time, it's also great because it tutorializes the player on a mechanic that's going to be used in the final boss fight. So it's about all making everything come back around full circle as best as possible, and they did a very, very good job with that. Helltaker, I'm not actually familiar with that game. Is that an indie game? Yep, agreed, Nara. Hades is extremely memorable for so many different reasons. Okay. Oh, it's a free-to-play puzzle game. I hadn't heard of it. All right. I'm going to actually take a short break. I'm going to get some tea. My throat's like kind of hurting me. I think it's because I took off like 3 days this week because of tech issues. It's just not used to talking so much. All right. I'll be right back. I'm going to get some tea, and then we'll talk about the reception that Portal had, and we'll talk about what lessons we can learn from the game, that the industry can learn from the game itself. So, back in a few. All right, glad you can hear me and glad I'm back. Please, internet, don't crash again. Now would be a very bad time to have a crash. Please don't do it. Please don't do it. No. Also, I love this background. I think this is such a cool wallpaper. All right. Okay. All right. So, we've discussed the development history of the game. We've discussed the final product of the game. We've talked about the games around the release of Portal. So now let's talk about the reception to Portal. So Portal finally comes out. And also, again, I want to explain how I talk about the reception setting. When it comes to talk about the reception of the game, I know a lot of people don't like review scores, but I think in terms of discussing for this, the best way to kind of get a general idea for people's opinion on the game, again, in a very generalized way, is with a number aggregate review score. It's not perfect, but it's the best thing to go for. So I pull all these numbers off of Metacritic. If you don't know how Metacritic works, Metacritic just takes all the reviews from major review sources like IGN, GameSpot, or any other major sources, and takes them and puts them all together and averages them out together. And then they also have the user review scores on the site. So they have two separate scores, one for professional critics and then one for just the player review score. And the other thing to know is that if there is a review that doesn't give a direct number score, if they give a letter score or if they don't mention a score at all, they just kind of review the game, what Metacritic will do is look at that review and try to assign it a number score so that they can then put it into the system and average that out. So that's something that's more common in recent times, within the past 5 years or so. Portal came out in, I think, 2007, so that won't be an issue here. Pretty much everyone at that time was giving out just flat number scores, but just something to know. So Portal came out and pretty much got, surprise, surprise, universal praise. Interesting enough, Portal, its own lone release, got a score of 90, whereas the orange box itself received a score of 96 on Metacritic for official critics. The Metacritic of 90 made it tied for 7th best game of 2007. It was tied with 4 other games. It tied with Half-Life Episode 2, Phantom Hourglass, Metroid Prime 3, and Forza Motorsport 2. And the games that beat it out in 2007 were games like Super Mario Galaxy, Crysis, Call of Duty 4, Halo 3, and BioShock. Ooh, that's hot. I mean, it's tea, so it should be hot, but didn't expect that. As for the user score, it actually fared a little bit better, surprisingly. The user score was a 9.2 out of 10, and this tied with the Orange Box. Orange Box also received a 9.2. And this means that Portal was tied for the 6th best game of all time when it comes to user scores, with 27 other games that also got a score of 9.2. It was tied with games like Super Mario 64, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Resident Evil 2, The Witcher 3, Metroid Prime 1, Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Ghost of Tsushima, The Last of Us, and Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. So, pretty high scores across the board. As for the public reception for the game, people were definitely surprised, as we talked about earlier. Most people bought the Orange Box for Team Fortress 2. Excuse me. Most people purchased the Orange Box for Team Fortress 2 and Half-Life. Portal was basically just a free extra game that they got included in a package deal when they bought it. And they played it because, it was a free game that was there. But based on most reviews and most people's receptions, Portal ended up actually being the highlight of the Orange Box. It was most people's favorite product that was in the entire release. The game was incredibly successful. It spawned a massive fan base and memes that were pretty much inescapable for months or even years after release of the game. Things like the companion cube and the cake as a lie meme. I mean, up even 13 years after release. I think it's almost exactly 13 years because, I think Portal came out in October of 2007. I think it was October 7th, if I remember correctly. And this is being recorded on October 1st. Now it's past midnight, so October 2nd. Almost the 13 years to the day after Portal was released. I am still getting Cake is a Lie references to this day. So, very, very passionate fan base, and certainly cemented itself in culture, in online culture, at least in a pretty significant way, in a very lasting way as well. There was also almost no real criticisms with the game. The only really consistent criticism that people seem to have with the game was the length of the game, saying that it was too short. But on the opposite side of that coin, a lot of people just as many people were praising it for its length, saying that because of its short length, it was able to be such a perfectly concentrated experience that it actually benefited from being such a short game. So I find it really interesting that most people's criticisms, the number one consistent main criticism I came across was also a very consistent strength to another group of people. Don't really see that very often. So after the success of Portal, of course, it got some sequels. The staff at Valve loved the idea of Portal so much that employees for Valve were pretty much clamoring to work on a sequel. And so, again, because of the very small size of the company, not many people at Valve got to really play it. They play tested it, but they didn't get to create it or be a part of the creation process. And a lot of members at Valve loved the idea about the game. So work on a sequel started almost immediately. And surprise, surprise, spoiler alert, the reception for Portal 2 was pretty much just as positive as the reception for Portal 1. There was some other spin-offs in terms of sequels or a continuation of the Portal universe. There was lore to expand in the world with the Ratman comic book. There was an ARG. There was an ARG for advertising to lead up to the release of Portal 2. And there was also a spin-off game called The Lab, which was a VR showcase game that took place in the Portal universe. So essentially there was, I believe it was 8 mini games where you do different physics-based mini games. Again, there's the physics part coming up with Valve. They really like their physics in video games. They were, I believe it was 8 different mini games where you interact and do fun little objectives that take place in the Portal universe. I watched some short videos on it. It actually looks really cute, and the fantastic writing that exists in the Portal games is absolutely there as well. So if you do have VR, I would suggest taking a look into it, because if I had VR, that would be one of my first purchases and one of my first downloads. Oh, it's honey. I'm like, wow, I'm a dribbling mess. I'm spilling my tea all over the place. That's just honey that I apparently missed getting in the cup. So, reception to the game was pretty much universally praised everywhere. Come on. So now we can talk about what the industry itself can learn from Portal. There's a couple lessons that we can learn from it. Sorry, we're back. I'm probably gonna have to call my ISP or see what the hell is going on, because this is really getting frustrating. Sorry, everyone. We don't have a whole lot longer to go with this, so my apologies. I hope we don't have any more crashes in the meantime before we finish up the discussion. I guess OBS hates Portal. All right, perfect. Okay, so we talked about the reception of Portal. We've talked about the history of Portal, and now let's move on to what the industry itself can learn from Portal. I think there's quite a few lessons that can be learned, and they're actually very significant. One thing is, I think the combination of bringing together a set of new creative minds and then surrounding them with a team of experienced veterans can be a perfect combination. People want new ideas all the time, especially when it comes to new entertainment. People really love new ideas, something that's different than what they've experienced before. People who have worked in the industry for a long time can fall into a bit of a creative rut. They can tunnel vision, get repetitive, approach things in the same ways because it has worked for them in the past. Fresh blood brought in can really offer new ideas to break free of the experienced people from the ruts, and then the experienced people can kind of harness it a little better. So basically, fresh blood can offer new ideas, and veterans can offer experience to help polish those ideas into a more finished product. That is basically what the result of Portal was. You had the team who brought in this idea of narbacular drop, the unique physics of the game and the puzzle solving aspects of it, and then they were combined with Valve, where they had very experienced writers, and they had some other coders that were helping them out as well. And then we have a game that's released that's considered by many different publications, many different resources, and people saying that they put Portal as one of the greatest video games of all time. As long as you get a good chemistry between people, mixing brand new people with brand new fresh ideas with someone who has the experience to create a product, it can make some absolutely beautiful results. Combine old new, yep. Another thing that we can learn is a concept boiled down to one concentrated idea can yield amazing results. This is, as Mally brought up earlier, and I want to build on, games nowadays really just try to cast as wide a net as possible. They try to get as many people interested as they can in the game, so they add tons of different mechanics all across the board. You have the exploration, you have the climbing, you have the driving, you have all the different mini games, you have the crafting, you have the combat, you have the stealth, all these different mix and matches and mashups of so many different genres of games that usually are their own. These different parts of the game are usually their own type of game in themselves, but they just force it all together into one game to try to get as many people interested as possible, and what they end up having is a final product that's just not memorable. I mean, it's like I talked earlier, where the reason why Gabe was so interested in bringing on the team was because they were able to overcome an issue that so many developers, it takes them a while to learn, and that is having a very strong base foundation and then building everything and bringing everything into the game is reinforcing that foundation. It's about taking a core principled idea and building upon on top of it to make that core principled idea even more and more fun. And then games nowadays, I feel like, try to spread out and try to just cram as many different ideas and possible things to do into one game to try to draw in as many people as possible to be interested and possibly purchase the game. And Portal is an idea of just taking one simple concept, the portal, solving puzzles with portals, and they built an entire game off of that. And it just, I mean, they made the presentation fantastic. And again, like I said, it's considered by many people to be one of the greatest games of all times. On top of that, we have quality of the game over length of the game. This game, for the average player, takes about 4 hours for them to beat. The game got fantastic reviews, and it even was it was originally packaged in the orange box is the only way to get it. It eventually got its own entire separate release on Xbox and PC. And through word of mouth of people's experience of the game, I believe the game was $20 when it came out. People were convincing other people to spend $20 for a 4-hour game. That is insane. Nowadays, people are talking all the time about, are they going to get the most value out of their money when they're purchasing these video games? And I think that developers seem to think what that means is trying to make a game that is just long by making just cramming as much content as possible and trying to stretch out the gameplay of it so people will play it longer, where they feel like they get the most value for their money. It doesn't necessarily need to be a long experience. It just has to be a very focused, great experience for that time. The game was only 4 hours, and it's sold like hotcakes. So many people, it's hard to find a player at this point who has not played Portal in some capacity, despite the fact how short the game is. It's about the quality of the game, not necessarily the length of the game. And again, to add on to it, the game was so popular that it got a sequel as well. Even though it was only a 4-hour game, people were clamoring and dying for more. And concepts and try to make a game out of it and discover the mechanics on the way, which usually ends up leading to failure. There's a very interesting video that I saw. I'll actually link it in the description down below for those watching on YouTube. Fascinating video about a guy who created his own game, and he talks about the process of it over the course of 5 years. And it was a roguelike game where at the beginning he had this idea of a setting, the genre, the characters you interact with, what the gameplay elements were going to be, and 12 other different things. He had these all 15 ideas from the very beginning, and was when he had something working, he'd be like, all right, now I'm going to try and incorporate this, and then all right, now I'm going to try and incorporate this. And after about a year into development, he had a working product, and after another year of trying to polish it up, he realized that it just wasn't fun. He had managed to incorporate it all together, but none of it was fun because he didn't start with a fun mechanic. He started with a very base layer that was easier to start with, and then try to build everything on top of it. After 2 years of working on the game, he realized that it just didn't have a fun base, and he had to start the entire thing over from scratch again. So it's about, again, building that base idea that you know is fun, and building the game around that idea, and trying to reinforce that idea. It's it's a lesson that a lot of developers take forever to learn. And then the last lesson we learned from this game is definitely a little bit more niche of a rule. It's not something that can be widely applied, but still something to consider. Packaging a game alongside other games can be an excellent way to sell a game. Portal was a very unique game. Puzzle games were not incredibly popular, and again, it was a unique game in and of itself for how I approach puzzles. And Portal was a very different game in genre than what Valve had previously released. So by releasing the game in a bundle that contained other beloved games, that was a very strong tool to get that new idea and game in front of potential players. And that's why a part of the reason why so many people were able to play it and experience it. Granted, this is a little bit niche because there's so many factors that have to lead up for this to work. There would have to be a package deal, so that it would have to be a game that could be incorporated with other games. Not every studio has a catalog of games they could sell as a bundle. One, just enough games to be sold as a bundle, but two, also being able to sell them together at one time. Some studios need as much money as they can get. There's also the fact that Portal was a very short game, being a 4-hour game. It's a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to justify giving a 4-hour game out for free than, say, a 15 or 20-hour game. So Portal was definitely the perfect size to be included as a free packaged game. And also, Valve was very lucky in that they had fantastic success with their previous IPs, with Half-Life being such a beloved franchise and Team Fortress being a franchise, a game that people were extremely excited for. So these pieces kind of came together very perfectly for Valve, but it is still something to take into account in the future. If a studio or a group is in the position where they have a short game, they kind of just want to get out to the people, they can try and get it out this way, where they no longer have to try to sell people on purchasing this short game. They just need to offer the package deal of a bunch of different games for a shorter price, include the game for free, and get the idea out there and see if people can be interested, and then either sell the game by itself so that money can be made off of that, or expand it into future games like they did in the future with Portal. There was another example of this that I can think of. This happened with Crackdown. Crackdown was, if you purchased Crackdown, it came with a beta code for Halo 3. So a lot of people purchased Crackdown specifically for the Halo code to play in the beta, and then they had the game, so they said, screw it, why not give it a try? And Crackdown was actually really fun. People absolutely loved it. If you can find a way to incorporate launching a game with something that already has an established fan base, it can be risky, it can be overshadowed, but it also has the opportunity to really get it in front of a ton of different people that never would have seen it before. But I think that's kind of it for the Portal discussion. Definitely the shortest discussion we've had on any of the games so far, but considering this game was only 4 hours, I still think we got quite a bit of mileage and quite a bit of information to discuss and talk about this game. And we still have Portal 2 to discuss on Monday, hopefully, as long as my internet's not having any more issues and I don't have to worry about anything being cut out like it was this time. But that's everything I have to say on the subject of the Portal discussion. Does anyone have any ideas, thoughts that they want to bring up about the Portal discussion before we end it for today? See you, YouTube. This is a Portal 2 song. I don't know what song this is. Ghost of Ratman. Oh, okay. I mean, I've said pretty much everything I've had to say. Portal is a fantastic game. I'm a total sucker for puzzle games. I love them. I love... it's also... it's almost, in a way, despite the fact it's not a platformer because you don't really jump much. Jump is not a huge mechanic in the game. It still kind of feels like jumping, just using platforming in different ways by using the momentum of the portals. So it was a puzzle platformer, which is just it's just the cat's pajamas for me. Absolutely loved it. This is a fantastic game. I enjoyed it through and through, and I was very happy to eventually get Portal 2. Portal 3 thoughts? I don't know. We'll talk about Portal 2 and how that came in. About how when Portal 1 ended, no one wanted a sequel. No one thought... So I shouldn't say no one wanted a sequel. People wanted a sequel, but they thought it would be impossible, that it would just, potentially tarnish Portal 1, that it was a Goliath task to try to tackle and go against. Yet they pulled it off. I think the same thing could be said about Portal 2. The way that Portal 2 ended, it definitely feels like a perfect ending, that there's nothing that can be done to expand upon. But if there is the drive to do it, they could possibly figure something out. The history about Portal 2's early development is absolutely fascinating. I can't wait to get in that discussion. For instance, the stream here will kill you. Thank you, Andy, for the contribution. All right. I think that's pretty much it. So thank you to everyone who was here for the discussion. I do appreciate it, for those who contributed. We will be back on Monday with the Portal 2 discussion. I plan on having the ukulele discussion up on YouTube, hopefully within the next 24 hours. On the bright side, since we have ukulele going up and Portal already finished with the discussion, and then we have Portal 2 coming in the next discussion within the next couple days, hopefully there should be a nice little regular releases on YouTube for the next couple weeks, which is nice. But I think that's pretty much it. Thank you everyone for chatting. Thank you everyone for taking part. I do appreciate it, and hopefully I will see you here in time for the Portal 2 discussion on Monday. You guys are great. Have a good night.